This is lecture 212. And in lecture 212, we're going to work on our assignment 202, which is basically preparing our topography for a physical model build. And I know this semester we're not able to do the true build on a laser cutter, but I still think it's relevant toward learning how to manufacture things when you start with a 3D model in Rhino and actually getting something physical out. So we're going to work today. This is really a multi-part lecture. It's multi-part exercise. 212 and 213 go together, and I'll end up repeating a lot of what I say today next class for exercise 213 and lecture 213. So today we're going to start from the basics. We did a little bit of this in the previous exercise where you pulled information from SketchUp and you dropped it into Rhino. And today I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm actually working with SketchUp 2020 this semester. And I wanted to do this because it's a little bit different. So I'm using the school's virtual desktop, or their remote desktop system. I'm going to go ahead and open up SketchUp 2020 here. And we'll hope that it opens up. Let's try that one more time. There we go. And when SketchUp opens up for the first time, I'm going to choose the architectural template. That just means my default inches, or my default units are going to be in inches. I can delete the person that's here. Let's see here. Let's erase her. There we go. I just right-click to erase. And I'm going to go to File and then Geolocation. Now, I got emails from several of you saying, wait a minute, it requires a sign-in. And this is an unfortunate side effect to using the School of Computers. Trimble, the company who makes SketchUp, wants us to sign in to use these features. I'm going to go ahead and click on Sign In here. And luckily, you don't have to pay for anything, but we do actually have to sign in. So if you've never signed up before, you'll want to type your email address in here. It appears that I have an account already set up with my Google sign-in, so I'm going to use that. So I'll click on Sign In with Google, and then I'll go ahead and type my grant at digitaltoolsforarchitects.com. So that's written in there. I'll go ahead and click on Next. And now I have to jump over into my password manager here real quick. I'll unlock that. Perfect. So I can copy and paste that in, and I'll click Next. And this happened to me before. I'm guessing it's going to happen again. I get a sign-in error, which is unfortunate. So we'll just go ahead and close those. And this is the side effect, again, of using the lab computers. And we'll just try that one more time. So I'll go to Geolocation and then Add Location. The sign-in pops up again. I'll click Sign In again. And it should work just fine this time. I'll click on Sign In with Google. There's my Digital Tools account. And there we go. We're all signed up to do the SketchUp Pro. So like I said, this is SketchUp Pro 2020. So in the Add Location, when we open it for the first time, we're going to see the Welcome to Add Location. We can basically click Next through all of these little prompts. And we'll continue to Add Location, and we can dismiss the help here. So I'm right here in my Add Location dialog box, and this is where we've had other problems occur this semester. So if I were to zoom in, I'm actually going to pick Mount Diablo. So we'll zoom in on where we are here. There we go. We'll zoom in a little bit, and I'll get to Mount Diablo State Park. Now, in previous lectures, I always said you zoom in until you get the white rectangle, and then you can capture the whole rectangle. It appears that that causes SketchUp's Add Location feature to hang and not actually download. So I'm going to continue zooming in until I'm at zoom level 17. So we'll zoom in a couple more clicks. There we are at zoom level 17. Once I'm at zoom level 17, I can go ahead and click on the Select Region button. And when I do that, it's going to ask me to select an imagery provider right here. Under Select Provider, I'll choose Digital Globe. There we go. And there is a rectangle right there that will represent what it is that I'm importing. So I'll go ahead and click on the Import button. And you should notice that this happens real quick, and that's a key. If it hangs for a long period of time, you're going to want to close out SketchUp and then start again. So I've gone ahead and I've imported that piece of terrain. I'll go up to the File menu here, and I'll go to my geolocation, and I'll click on Show Terrain. And when I do that, I should get an idea of what the terrain looks like. So in this case, it looks pretty good. I can use my middle mouse button. If I hold it down and rotate, it's going to orbit for me, so I can kind of see what that looks like. Yeah, that looks like a pretty reasonable piece of terrain. So at this point, I want to actually bring this out of being a SketchUp file and put it into something that Rhino can read. So I'm going to go up to the File menu, and I'll choose Save As. And when I choose that, under this Save As type, I can actually change and go back a few versions. And so this is something that's important because Rhino doesn't recognize the most current version of SketchUp. So I'm going to go back to SketchUp 2018 right there, and this should work fine. I'm going to put this on my OneDrive. I have that set up to sync. So let me go into my live demonstrations for today. And let's come down here into exercise 212. There we go. And we'll call this Mount Diablo 2. It looks like I already have Mount Diablo 3 there. How about we just call it Mount Diablo? There we go. And I'll go ahead and click on Save. So that is all of what I need to do to create the file in SketchUp. So this is giving me the raw terrain data. So now that I have that raw terrain data, I can jump over into Rhino and we can start working with my Rhino file. So I'm going to double click on Rhino 6 here, and we'll open that up. So we'll give it a little bit of time here to open up. All right, Rhino opens. I'm going to choose Large Object Inches as my template. And Rhino will go ahead and open up. That's great. Now that Rhino's open, there are a couple things I need to do to set up to start working here. First thing I'm going to do is go to Render. And under the Render menu, I'm going to change the current renderer from Rhino Render to V-Ray for Rhino. Perfect, now that's been done. And the other thing is, sometimes on the school computers there's a little glitch. I'm going to correct that glitch by going to Tools, and then Options. And I'm going to come all the way down into View and expand it, and then choose OpenGL and uncheck this GPU tessellation option. If you're not experiencing problems where you're not seeing all of the whole lines, you can go ahead and safely leave that on, but I've had enough times where I've had that problem, so I just go ahead and do that by default. So I'll click on the standard toolbar set so I get all of my standard tools. I'll double check and confirm down here that my default units are in inches. That's important before I bring any SketchUp information in. Now that all of that's correct, I can go ahead and go to File, and then Import. And I'm going to choose my SketchUp file, the one that I just saved. So that was in my OneDrive folder. And it was under lecture record. Oops, sorry, live demonstrations. There we go. And I'm going to go ahead and go into my 136 folder, come down here into my exercise 212, and there's Mount Diablo. That's the one that I saved. And we'll go ahead and click on Open. So all of these options are just fine. So we'll leave all of those default options and we'll go ahead and say OK. And now my SketchUp file has been brought in. So if I zoom out here a little bit, actually the faster way of doing it would be to type Z for zoom, followed by S for selected. That's going to zoom out and let me see the whole SketchUp terrain. And I can orbit around it. Yep, looks like it's turned out OK. That's good. Let's go ahead and make my perspective view large here. There we go. And we'll come over and we'll adjust the layer properties a bit. So I'll click on the Layers tab. You notice that by default, I have a default layer, layers 1 through 5, and then I have some SketchUp specific layers right here. I'm going to go ahead and rename these SketchUp layers. So instead of Location Snapshot, We're going to change that to be called SketchUp. All right, that's called SketchUp. And that'll let me control the SketchUp files nicely. Okay, so we'll take layer 1 here. We'll make that the current layer. So let's go ahead and check the box next to it so it becomes the current layer. There it is. And with that as the current active layer, I'm going to perform a contour command of this surface right here. So I can select the surface first, and then I can go ahead and type contour. And there we go. I'll press enter. And it's going to ask me for my base point. So I can't snap to the edge just yet, so I'm going to turn on my vertex snap, which is going to allow me to snap to the edge of that. Remember, this is a triangulated mesh, not a NURBS surface, so that's why I need the vertex snap. So I'll go ahead and snap to that corner. And after I've done that, I'll move out to the right here. Now I want to make sure that I'm in line, so let me turn on my ortho snap. And I'll make sure that I'm dragging out, or actually I'm just moving my mouse out to the right side here, such that I'm in line with the x-axis. So we'll go ahead and do that. And I'll make a single click. Then it's going to ask me for distance between contours. So this is something that I'm going to want to type in feet. So I'm guessing it's going to be something like 100 feet. So I'll type in 100 followed by the apostrophe sign to get 100 feet. And then I'll press enter on the keyboard. And it divides up my surface. Now, it turns out that the scale of this is such that I probably could do a more dense set. So if I'm looking at this, this happens about every 3 triangulations. So I could really do it about every 33 feet and get better results. So I'm going to press Ctrl-Z to undo. And then I'll do that contour one more time. So let me select the surface here. I'll type contour. My base point will be the same. Let me zoom out just a little bit. We'll snap right to that corner. And I'll move out to the right side here, making sure that I'm on axis. There we go, I'm on axis. I'll click. And then I'll go ahead and type 33 feet this time. There we go. And my results are pretty close to what the mesh is. So I have all of those curves. I could rename layer 0 here to be contour X for clarity. So let me type contour X there. Oops. And then let's change layer 2 here to be contour Y. And it looks like I'm having technical difficulties. Alright, so that was a little technical glitch. My screen went black there for a second. I just paused and waited for it to come back, and it did. So let's change and rename layer 2 here to be contour Y. There we go. And then I'll go ahead and make contour Y the active layer. I'm going to make sure nothing's selected here, and then I'll select the surface. There it is, and I can go ahead and type contour again. And I'll hit enter. I'll choose my base point. Again, that same corner point here. And this time, instead of going off in the X direction, I'm going to go off in the Y direction. And then we'll use the same distance. So this is 33 feet. I want to make sure I type in that foot sign, because if I don't, I'm going to end up with poor end results. So there we go. So if I were to turn off the SketchUp file altogether at this point, we'd end up with a bunch of curves going in both the X and the Y direction, which is what we're after. Now I should point out that a mistake that people commonly make, and I'll use layer 3 here to do it, is that when people do the contour, They do the contour. Let's go back to where I had just the X contour showing. There we go. They do the contour of both the, there we go, of both the surface and all the curves. So in this case, I have the surface and I have all the curves. And if I went and did the contour of those two, let's pick the same base point. Come on, snap. There we go. We'll go out in that direction. Now, if I did the same contour, I press enter, I'm going to get a bunch of points. There we go. So that's a problem because I didn't want all of those points. So I'm ending up with the wrong piece of information. So again, that's not what we're after. So that's why I did it on its own layer. I'm going to go ahead and press Control Z to undo that one. And we'll go ahead and turn off SketchUp and we'll turn back on the contour Y. So what we have now is just the contours in the X and the Y. Let's clean up those contours. I'll double click and we'll look at this in the top view. So we'll be in the top view. Let me zoom out here a little bit so we're seeing the X and the Y. Now one of the ways I can confirm that these were set up correctly is that as I'm zooming out, I can see that those lines are perfectly horizontal and perfectly vertical. That's a key component to making this work. So at this point I need to do some trimming. So I'll go ahead and I'll use this line right here as a trim. So I'll select it and then I'll type trim. And then when it says select objects to trim, I'm going to come in here and trim all of those lines that are right above that line. There we go. Now sometimes I need to zoom in and make sure I got them all. It looks like I missed one little piece there. So let's come down here and make sure I get that as well. Perfect. I'll go ahead and press enter. And then it's time to go ahead and do the same trim on these other sides. So let me use this line here. We'll type trim. And we'll trim off all of those line segments. Here I end up having to select and delete that piece. Let me go ahead and trim all of these off. It's possible for me to get in and trim those, though it's a little bit more work. I could do trim and come in here and kind of do this in two operations. But I have to do it zoomed in. There we go. See how I do on that section. And then we'll zoom in on that last section. Perfect. And I'll press enter. That should be all nice and clean. And we have this last piece right here. And it does look like those lines extend a little bit. That's much harder than picking this line and doing the trim. I think I'm just going to pick that line to do the trim. And then we can drag, again, from left to right, or from right to left, excuse me, to be able to delete all of those at once. Let's delete this last piece. And there we are. We have a nice rectangle that's bordered by 4 clean curves. None of the middle contours extend past those 4 exterior borders. So we're now ready to do our network surface, or our curved network of these lines. But before we do that, now's a perfect time to save this file. So I'll go to File and then Save. And I'm going to save this file. We'll do it as exercise 212. And this is going to be the spring of 2021. And we'll click Save. There we are. And now we can go ahead and do the network surface. So I'll type in network surface. Alternatively, I could go up to curve from objects, surface, curve network. There we go. Select curves and network. We'll go ahead and select all of those curves, and I'll press enter. Now, this is a common dialog that pops up that says you're calculating your surface with more than 100 curves. Are you sure you want to proceed? Generally speaking, you can click yes without any consequences. If you find that you have trouble, however, sometimes there's another way of doing this, and I'll show you that in just a second. So I'll go ahead and click on yes. And there you go. It was able to do it. It's automatically sorting the curves, so I see a side A, B, C, and D. We're going to wait for just a second for that dialog box to pop up with options. Give it a little bit more time. There we go. If your computer's having trouble processing this data, you can eliminate one of the zeros. So eliminate a 0 there, and we'll eliminate a 0 here. That lets us work at 0.01 and 0.1. It may take a second to adjust because it's actively previewing. And then you can go ahead and say OK. And I'll do this a second time so that you guys can see it with my other option if you're having trouble with this process. So we'll let this run for a little bit. This is the kind of thing that can take 4 or 5 minutes to finish processing. So in the nature of recording, the good news is I can pause and then come back when we're ready. But for you guys, you'll just have to be patient and let it process for a few minutes. So that took a lot less time than I thought, so that's good. I'm going to make sure that nothing's selected, so I'll click off. And then I'll come over here and I'm selecting just the surface. So let me select just that surface. And I'll go ahead and type rebuild. And when I type rebuild, I have an ability to change the point count of the surface. So right now the U and V, actually we can tell what the current V is over 1,000. We're going to change these two values to 200 by 200. That's kind of the default to get started. I'll go ahead and click on OK. And it's going to rebuild my surface. If I see this surface now in the perspective view, let me turn off my contours in the X and in the Y. We can see the surface that I've created. I could actually switch over into my shaded mode. So let's jump over here to shaded. There we go, and we can kind of see my surface. I think it's a little bit easier to see this surface if I change the color of the layer to be white. There we go. Now it's a little bit easier to see the contours of that surface, like that. So that turned out pretty well. I'm going to name this layer 200. So we know that it's relevant to the 200 by 200 rebuild. And I'm going to process this again. Now you guys, for exercise 212 here, don't need to reprocess this each time. You can just rebuild the same surface. But for my purposes and the instructional purposes, I'm going to go ahead and rebuild this again. So let me make layer 4 active. And I have contour X and contour Y turned on. I'm going to turn off contour 200. And I'm going to do that network surface again. This time I'm going to show you with with less curves. So if you're running into trouble where you're not able to process the curve network, sometimes this is a good strategy. What I'll do is I'll select from right to left right here at the top such that I'm picking only the vertical lines and the topmost horizontal line. I'll then come down and hold down Shift and select the last line at the bottom. So essentially in this setup, I've eliminated almost half the lines as part of my curve network. So sometimes if you're running into computer problems where it's not processing, you can do it this way and jump ahead in the processing. So I'll go ahead and go up to my surface and then curve network, or I could type in network SRF. And you can tell that this builds the preview a lot faster. So it's fewer curves, it's a little bit less accurate, but it's going to work a little bit faster on the computer. So there we are. We'll leave my default values there. We'll go ahead and say OK. And it will go ahead and process and build out that next piece of the surface. So we'll give it a little bit of time to chug through its calculations here. And it turns out that I just lost the connection request. So this is something that is, I'm sure, frustrating to you. It's also something that I have communicated to the district IT personnel, telling them that this is an ongoing problem. So the good news for me is that I had this running with my OneDrive running in the background. So give me just a second. I'm going to log back in here to my idm.dvc.edu. I'll pull this up. Sorry, I should have pulled that up on the screen so you guys could see it. I'm going to go back to my ET103. We'll accept here. And we'll say OK. And it's possible that I'll come back and get the same computer. It's not likely, but it's possible. There we go. So I'm back. It doesn't look like I got the same computer. We'll give it just a second to finish its little warm-up practices here. And so this is a good example of why using the OneDrive system is a good idea, because it protects you and makes sure that your files are actually backed up for you. So I'm going to come down here right when I first log in. I'm going to go over to the OneDrive icon. It says I'm not signed in. I'll go ahead and sign in. So there it is. I'll click on sign in. It brings up this setup OneDrive. I'm going to enter my Insight email address. So this would be your Insight email from school. Mine happens to be faculty, so it's set up a little bit differently than yours. There we go. When I choose my option here, it's going to be work or school. Perfect. Now I have to get my password, and again, this is something that I keep in my password manager on my Mac, so I have to go ahead and go back to it, and we'll copy it, and I'll sign in. Default location here is just fine. I'm going to uncheck these folders because I don't need to be backing up those folders. We're going to go ahead and skip all of those folders. We'll continue to next. We'll continue to next here. We'll continue to next, later, and open my OneDrive folder. So it's now connected to my OneDrive folder, which is great. Now, I have a pretty large OneDrive folder. I have a lot of stuff that's stored here, and I don't need all of that stuff right away. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to select everything. So I'll press Control-A to select everything. I'll right-click, and I'll say Free Up Space. Now, what this does when I choose Free Up Space is it keeps a file reference to all of my files, but it doesn't actually download all the files, which could take an hour or two. I don't need that. So we'll just keep the reference alive, and then I'll download those files that I really need locally on the computer. So we'll give it just a little bit of time to finish that processing here. And it's almost done. Perfect. It's almost done. So then I'll go into my live demonstrations folder, and I'll come in here to my 136 exercises. I'll come down here to 212, and on this folder I will right click and I will say always keep on this device. And what that does is it tells OneDrive, you know what, download everything in this folder, but this folder only. And so the advantage there is now everything's downloaded locally. I can come in here to my spring of 2021 file. I can double click that, and it's going to open back up where I left off. So we'll give Rhino a second here to go ahead and boot up for me. And there we go, Rhino's coming up for me. And we'll come back, and remember I have to set those things up. I already set them up the first time, but I'm going to have to go up. This is a different computer. Let me go to Current Renderer, and we'll change to V-Ray for Rhino. And you'll see that I now have that problem where I'm not seeing all of my lines completely. So this is something that happens on the school computers. I'm going to go up to my Tools, and then choose Options. And we'll come down here under View. We'll go to OpenGL, and we'll uncheck this GPU tessellation, and we'll say OK. And when I do that, I get all of my lines back perfectly. So let's go ahead and take a look here. And it looks like I did lose a little bit of work. I have my contour X and Y, but I don't have my network surface. So we'll do that network surface again. I'm going to use that easier method here where I choose just the top and all the vertical lines. I'll hold down Shift and choose the last line right there. And then we'll type network surface, or I can go up to the surface menu and choose curve network. So there's network SRF for network surface. It recognizes the 4 edges. That's perfect. There we go. And I'll go ahead and say OK. And we'll give this a little bit of time. Remember, this can take 4 or 5 minutes to finish its processing. And And the advantage, again, of recording is that I can pause during this. Okay, so I believe it has finished its processing now. I'm going to click off so that nothing is selected. And then I'm going to come in here and select just the surface itself. And it turns into that big yellow block. Now that that's been selected, I'm going to type rebuild. And just like I did last time on this rebuild, I want to rebuild it at 200 by 200. It's kind of a good default value. There it is at 200 by 200. And we will rename layer 3 here to be 200. So let me double click and type 200. And there we go. If I switch over into the perspective view, we can see that surface there, and we can turn off contour X and contour Y and see just the surface itself. I can also switch over into my shaded mode so I can see it a little bit better. The blue color isn't really working. Let's try black and see if it works better. Last time I picked white and I thought it worked pretty well, but actually black I think gives us a little more shadow. So we'll do that. Now I want to compare those various levels of rebuilds so you can decide what level is best for you. But before I do that, I'll go ahead and click on Save so that I don't lose that work if I get kicked out of the DVC computers again. I'm going to save this one. This is my 200. I'm going to do a copy. So I'll go up to, type copy or transform copy, and I'm just going to choose in place here. So that copies it right on top of itself. And then I'm going to come over here to layer 4. I'll right click and I'll say change object layer. And that moves one of these onto layer 4. So we can turn it on, turn it off, and you can see it. I'm going to select the layer 4 surface. So there's the layer 4 surface. And I'm going to type rebuild. And this time I'm going to change the value to 100 by 100. And we'll go ahead and say OK. Now when I change that to 100 by 100, you can see the collision that's happening, where the green, or the 100 by 100, is smoothing out the surface versus the 200 by 200. So it's slightly smoother. If I turn off the 200, there we go, we can see that green, and this is starting to get pretty smooth. And in this case, I think it would be perfect for what we're working toward. So I'm going to use the 100 by 100. I could rebuild it further, but it's going to get a lot smoother from there. So I'm going to work on this 100 by 100. We'll go ahead and rename that layer to 100, and I will save it. Perfect. And now it's time to start thinking of this in actual physical modeling terms. So in order to do that, I want to make this model in the physical world 11 inches by 17 inches. Now on the course website, I have a little cheat sheet, and you guys have probably already seen this. Let me see if I can find it and bring it up for you. There's that cheat sheet for us. And this is going to, it says your drawing size, there's our laser bed, and this is our paper size, 11 by 17, and this helps you out based on what scale you would choose. So for example, if I wanted a model that was at 1 to 100 scale, so there's 1 to 100 right there, I'd come along here and I'd say, okay, at a paper size or a model size of 11 inches by 17 inches, my size would be 2,400 feet by 1,100 feet. Oh, I'm in the wrong category. Sorry, let's back that one up. Sorry, I'd be 1,100 feet by 1,700 feet. So I'm going to come over here into my model. I'm going to work in the top view, and I'm going to draw a rectangle. So let me come over here to the standard tool set. I'm going to use my rectangle corner to corner tool, and I'm going to say at 1,700 feet, comma, 1,100 feet. Enter. Now that rectangle fits rather nicely with the terrain that I have. So let me move it over there a little bit, and we'll move it up a little bit. Now you'll notice that in this lecture, if you watch the last lecture, it's a little bit different because last time I chose a scale at 1 to 250 as my example. But in that case, my terrain would have been too small to cut out accurately. So if I came over here and I did, sorry, I don't know this off the top of my head, and I did the 1 to 250, the model would have been 2,750 feet by 4,250. And if I did that in my rectangle, so we'll say at 4,250 feet, comma 2750 feet, my rectangle would be way too large. So I needed to scale down based on the information that I had. And so in this case, I had enough terrain to be able to do the 1:100 model. So there it is. So there's my rectangle at 1:100 scale of my terrain. So at this point, I need to arrange it on my piece of terrain here. That looks reasonable. I might move it down just a little bit. Let me type move, and we'll move it down. Sometimes it helps when you're looking in the top view to actually switch from wireframe mode into shaded mode, because you can kind of see where the hills would be. So we'll say that that's good enough. And then in the top view, I'm going to go ahead and project that rectangle down onto this surface. So I'm going to type project, and we'll project it down onto this surface. I'll press enter. And that then gives me, if we switch over into the perspective view here, the line that I need to trim my surface. So I have that line. I'll go ahead and type trim, and I'll trim off the extra surface for my model. So now this surface is the right size at 100 by 100, or excuse me, at 1:100 scale to be 11 inches by 17 inches. So if I was making a physical model and I wanted it to be 11 inches by 17 inches, at 1:100 scale, my terrain is accurate. So now that I have the surface terrain, there we go, it's time to start slicing this up into pieces that I can make my model out of. So this is where that cheat sheet comes back again. So we were working at 1:100. My overall model size was 1100 feet by 1700 feet. We now need to know the contour material thickness. So this section right here is what matters. So in this scenario, my cardboard is 5/32 of an inch. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to look in my row here at 1:100. I come over here right there. So this 15.625 feet would be what 5/32 of an inch of cardboard would be equal to. So 15.625 feet. So when I come over here and I start to make my contours, so we can call this, let's call this topo lines, and we'll make that the active layer. I'll come over here to my surface. I'm going to type contour. We'll use my base point down here. Let me turn on my end snap right there. Now this time, instead of going in the X direction or instead of going in the Y direction, I need to go in the Z direction. So I'm going to double click to get out, come back over here into either my front view or my right side view. I'm going to turn on ortho to make sure that I'm going straight up and down, and there I am going straight up and down. And my distance is going to be that 15.625 feet. So make sure you put the apostrophe in there, otherwise it's not going to turn out right. So 15.625 feet, I'll hit enter, and it's going to build out all of those contours for me. So I can turn off the surface now, and I'm left with just all of my individual little contours. So that's perfect. That's where I want to be. As we continue with this exercise, the next part is to draw the steps that go up the sides. And there's two methods for drawing these steps, and I'll show you both methods. One I'll do on the short side, one I'll do on the long side, so you can get a sense for these two various methods. So the first method, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer here, and we'll call this new layer steps 1. Okay, so I'll make that active, which it is. I'm going to come over here to my points tool, and instead of choosing a single point, I'm going to choose multiple points. So I'm going to click and hold and make sure that I'm on this multiple points option. I'm going to make sure that my end point is snap is turned on, and I'm going to come to the end of this line, and I'm going to snap to the end all the way along. And there we go. So I have points all the way along that edge. I'm going to then take those points and I'll orbit a little bit so that it's easier to select them. I'm going to select just those points. If I accidentally select one of the contours, I'm going to want to hold down Control and deselect it. And with those points selected, I'm going to use that Rotate 3D command. So I'll type Rotate 3D. if I can type, there it is, rotate 3D. I'll snap to the first point, the lowest most point here, and then I'm going to go off in the Y direction in this case. Then I'll come up perfectly vertical, there. And sometimes if you're having trouble getting this to snap, you can hold down Shift. In my case, I already have ortho turned on, so it's snapping rather nicely for me. And now those are laying flat. So I've taken those curves and I've just laid them down flat. And then I'll go ahead and use those points to draw the steps. So I'll come over here to the polyline tool. I'll start at that first point. And as I draw, I'll come over here and I'll snap. Let me make sure I have points on so that I can snap to points. And we'll come over here until I meet up at perpendicular. Let me turn on perpendicular snap. There we go. So I'll set that, come over here, and there's perpendicular. And we'll continue drawing with each one of these steps. So again, I always want to snap to perpendicular at each step. Now something looks wrong on that point right there. I think I didn't snap all the way to the end. So I'm going to stop with that one. I'm going to continue over here and we'll fix it a little bit later. That's what next class is going to be for. We'll start and go through and try to make corrections for any mistakes that you made. So bear with me for a second while I jump my way through this. All right, almost there. There. And we'll end right there. Now after I've drawn all of that, I'll go ahead and select all of those. There they are. I'm going to use that rotate 3D command again. There's rotate 3D. We'll start at the same first point right there. We'll go off in the Y direction, and we'll go from being flat to being vertical. And yeah, you can see there was an error there. This point didn't get on the end, so I wasn't able to make that set of steps. So now that I've done it with that method, I have my set of steps. I'm reasonably happy. We'll fix that problem next class. But there's another method for doing this, and I find this other method much easier once you get used to it. So here's the challenge. This one that I just did is easier when you don't have any experience, but if you practice with something called a CPlane, it's going to end up being easier. So what I'm doing here, this is kind of like AutoCAD when you change the UCS coordinates. But if you're unfamiliar with that, let me explain it in Rhino terms. What we're doing is we're changing the drawing plane. We're changing what plane we're drawing in. And by default, we're drawing in the XY plane or the top plane or the ground, as if we're just drawing on the ground. So if I were to draw something, anything, no matter what I draw, it's always going to be flat on the ground. So if I zoom around here, there you go, it's getting flat at a certain point. We're going to change that plane so that we're drawing vertically along this side. And I'm going to do that by coming over here to the perspective menu, clicking the drop down, and then saying set CPlane 3 points. I'll pick the lowest most endpoint right there, and then I'll go off along the x-axis. So there I am off along the x-axis. My third point is going to be going along the z-axis. So let me double click to get out and make sure that I'm going up and down in either the front or right side view. Again, I'm not snapping to anything. And when I do that, you'll see that my little grid changes to being in plane with my steps. So this makes it much easier. I can come in here with my polyline tool. I can snap. I don't have any points. I can just start snapping directly to the ends of the line and drawing each one of these steps as I go up in space. Like that. Now, one of the things that I can do to confirm that this is set up correctly is at any point I can stop and I can select it, and then I can look at it in the side view. So let me come down here in the front view, and every one of my horizontals should be perfectly horizontal, and every one of my verticals should be perfectly vertical. Likewise, if I looked at it in the right side view, it should look like one continuous straight line. It shouldn't be leaning to one side or the other. So that's a way of confirming that these are done correctly. So what I want you to do for the rest of class today, and for your exercise 212, is I want you to get all 4 of the sides done. We'll come back and we'll revisit some of the more complicated things, like what do you do when you reach a point like this at the top of a mountain? There's another point here where this contour here is the same as this contour here. How do we solve that problem? And we'll also come back and revisit what happens at the corners. How do we solve what happens at the corners? So that'll all be for next class. But what I'd like you to get done today is I'd like you to get all of the steps done on each of the sides. When you're done, go ahead and give me a screenshot. So go to the little downward facing triangle here, go to capture to file, and that'll save a nice JPEG of where you are. Go ahead and save that, and then you'll post that for your exercise 212. So I'm glad you guys saw that I have problems with connectivity too, and that I lose connection. I hope that you guys paid attention to how to connect via the OneDrive so that your files are always backed up. And that certainly saves you work when you get disconnected. I'm going to go to File, Save. And now as part of the disconnection process, if it doesn't boot me off on its own, I'm going to go ahead and come in here and I'm going to make sure that all of my files end up getting synced. So it looks like it's still syncing that exercise 212. So I'll wait for that to finish its syncing. And there it is, it's finished its syncing. I'm going to go ahead and go into Help and Settings. And I'm going to go in here, I'm going to go to Settings here, and I'm going to unlink this PC. And again, that's only after I've made sure all of my syncing is done. We'll go ahead and just click on Unlink Account. And then I can go ahead and disconnect this as a whole. So let me close Rhino. I'll close my OneDrive folder, and I'll come over here, and I'll choose the power button and then disconnect. And that'll let me out of the remote desktop computer. So I hope that's helpful in walking through. I think we were able to solve the SketchUp issue that people have been having, and I think you'll be able to move forward. Please come to Open Lab if you're having trouble. I want to make sure that you understand this and can do it seamlessly and easily. We'll check back in for exercise 213 next class.